What has caused ships and aircraft to vanish without leaving any trace behind? Why have aeronautical instruments and navigational systems suddenly stopped functioning or altered course on their own? Historical shipping records make one fact clear. The mysteries associated with the Bermuda Triangle stretch much further back in time than most people realize. From the earliest periods of oceanic exploration, sailors who entered those waters reported strange and unexplained sights. Jason Martel has pointed out that serious awareness of the Bermuda Triangle effectively begins with Christopher Columbus. Columbus was an exceptionally careful and highly regarded navigator. The logs he kept during his voyages to the New World are known for their accuracy. As his ships entered the region that would later be called the Bermuda Triangle, he recorded compass malfunctions. The following night, he described a large fireball striking the surface of the ocean. He also noted unusual lights and other strange atmospheric phenomena. The record shows that the story of the Bermuda Triangle is not a modern urban legend invented near the start of the 21st century. It is as old as the written accounts of the first people who sailed into that area, approximately 450 years after Columbus. On December 5th, 1945, the United States military encountered what remains the Triangle's most perplexing episode. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 U.S. Navy torpedo bombers departed from a naval air station in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, on a routine training mission. Not long after takeoff, all 5 aircraft disappeared. The mystery intensified when the Navy launched a rescue plane to search for the missing flight, and that aircraft also vanished. 6 planes, each flown by experienced and skilled pilots, were gone without explanation. The loss struck observers as especially strange because it occurred in the modern era. Radar existed. Radio communication existed, yet 5 aircraft, and then a 6th, simply disappeared. The central question remains, where did they go? It is as if the planes were removed from ordinary reality and transferred into something else. What that something else might be continues to define the enduring mystery of the Bermuda Triangle. Over the decades, very few people have survived to describe unusual phenomena they encountered inside the triangle. American pilot Bruce Gernon is one of the rare exceptions. In 1970, Gernon, his father, and a business associate were flying from the Bahamas toward Florida when Gernon noticed a strange cloud formation directly ahead of the aircraft. As the plane drew closer, he reported that the cloud appeared to open into a donut-shaped hole or vortex. Gernon later described the tunnel as enormous at first, then rapidly contracting. When the aircraft entered the opening, luminous lines formed along its length, creating the visual impression of looking down a rifle barrel. The lines rotated slowly in a counterclockwise direction. He experienced intense electrical activity, with flashes appearing and disappearing around the plane. Visibility was reduced to a strange grayish-yellow fog that he later termed electronic fog. At the same time, his instruments began to malfunction, and he felt a powerful and unusual physical sensation. When the aircraft finally emerged from the tunnel, Gernon contacted Miami Air Traffic Control. Controllers reported that they could not locate the plane on radar. Approximately 3 minutes later, the controller returned to the frequency in an excited state and announced that the aircraft had been identified over Miami. Gernon found the report difficult to accept. The entire flight had lasted only 33 minutes. Under normal conditions, the same route should have required closer to 1 hour and 3 minutes. Could a discrepancy of that magnitude in both elapsed time and geographic position actually occur? And could advanced extraterrestrial craft be using similar openings or gateways to reach Earth? According to Albert Einstein's general theory of relativity, the underlying physics at least permits the possibility. Jason Martel has suggested that by employing gravitational effects to bend space-time, such craft might draw additional energy from regions like the Bermuda Triangle. That concentrated energy could enable rapid transitions, described as a burst of warp-speed travel, by harvesting particles or fields present in those locations. At California State University, Fullerton, in 2013, physicist Jim Woodward conducted a series of laboratory experiments he believes may eventually transform the way humanity travels through space. Woodward's primary scientific interest has been the fundamental problem of propulsion. To reach velocities that represent a meaningful fraction of the speed of light, he argues it is necessary to gain control over inertia itself. That requirement led him into detailed study of the relationship between gravity and inertia, and ultimately to the conclusion that rapid transit through spacetime may be physically achievable. Woodward's research is directed toward testing a long-standing and still controversial idea known as Mach's principle. The principle proposes a direct connection between the inertial behavior of mass here on Earth and the gravitational influence of all the distant matter distributed throughout the universe. Woodward theorizes that if the principle can be confirmed and harnessed, it could provide the practical foundation for Stargate-style travel. The concept was first clearly stated in 1883 by the Austrian physicist Ernst Mach. In Woodward's own words, Mach's principle at its simplest level asserts that when an object is pushed and resists that push, the resistance arises from the gravitational action of the most distant matter in the universe acting through the object. In other words, the remote mass of stars and galaxies is what determines the inertial properties of objects in our local environment. Robert H. Frisby has summarized the same idea. Every star, every planet, and every galaxy exerts an influence on conditions here on Earth. That influence occurs because those distant bodies warp space-time. Even though the effect is not directly visible, the physical world we experience is shaped by processes occurring potentially many light years away. Woodward's original interest in Mach's principle was not the creation of wormholes. He wanted to develop a revolutionary form of propulsion that would not require a vehicle to expel mass in order to move. Conventional rockets and jet engines operate on the same basic principle. Material is thrust backward so the craft moves forward. A rocket ejects hot gases. A jet engine draws air in at the front and expels it at the rear. Nearly all existing propulsion systems rely on that reaction. A Mach effect system would function differently, more like a craft riding a wave. By generating a wave in spacetime itself, the vehicle could move forward without ejecting reaction mass. As the research progressed, Woodward realized that Mach's principle carried implications beyond propulsion alone. He came to believe it might supply the key to constructing traversable wormholes, thereby opening the possibility of travel to the most distant regions of the universe. Laboratory results suggested that if ordinary mass could be temporarily separated or decoupled from the gravitational influence of distant cosmic matter, substantial quantities of negative energy might become accessible, the very condition theoretical physicists consider necessary to keep a wormhole open. In principle, Woodward argues, it should be possible to engineer devices capable of screening local matter from the gravitational effects of the rest of the universe. If that can be accomplished, Stargate-like passages become conceivable. Although the validity of Mach's principle continues to be debated within the scientific community, Woodward maintains that his experimental data support it. In the laboratory, he passes electrical current through stacks of lead zirconium titanate crystals, commonly abbreviated PZTs. The current causes the rest mass of a device he calls the Mach effect thruster to fluctuate rapidly. If Mach's principle is correct, those fluctuations in mass should interact gravitationally with the distant matter of the universe and produce a small but measurable thrust. The apparatus is mounted inside a Faraday cage at the end of a sensitive beam balance, and the entire assembly is placed in a vacuum chamber. The vacuum environment is required because the expected forces are extremely small, on the order of a micronewton. Data collected over the course of a full day show clear patterns. A distinct thrust transient appears when the driving frequency is switched on, followed by another transient when the frequency is switched off. The red trace on the display records thrust. The dark blue trace records power delivered to the device. According to Woodward, none of those thrust signals should be present if Mach effects do not exist. Washington, D.C. National Institutes of Health, 90 scientists, launched the Human Genome Project with the ambitious goal of identifying every gene in the human body and determining the complete structure of human DNA. The knowledge produced by that efforts may eventually give humanity the ability to intervene directly in its own evolutionary trajectory and to alter the biological characteristics of the species. Some researchers have begun to ask whether, once we possess that level of mastery over human genetics, we will also gain clearer insight into the true nature of the beings commonly described as gray aliens. When the typical physical description of a gray, enlarged head, large wraparound eyes, slender body, is examined from the standpoint of natural evolutionary pressures, the proportions appear poorly adapted to life on a planet like Earth. The same proportions, however, become far more intelligible if the beings are the product of deliberate bioengineering. That observation has led a number of investigators to conclude that the greys are most realistically understood as engineered. entities rather than the outcome of ordinary. Darwinian selection. Ken Storch has proposed that extraterrestrial visitors long ago identified a terrestrial species whose genetic code could be modified. The modifications allowed the visitors to interact with the resulting population and in the process to safeguard the long-term continuity of their own lineage. In this interpretation, modern humans function as the genetic carriers of that intervention. Ongoing reports of abductions may reflect continued adjustment of the same genetic program. Storch does not characterize the Greys as inherently hostile. He views humanity as an instrument within a larger biological strategy. Michael Dennin has outlined the basic biological requirements that would have to be met for interbreeding between humans and an extraterrestrial species to be possible. First, the alien life form would almost certainly need to be carbon-based, so that the underlying chemistry would be compatible. Second, the genetic architecture would need to be sufficiently similar to our own. On a planet whose environmental conditions broadly resembled those of Earth, the evolution of bipedal, tool-using, language-capable beings is not improbable. If the genetic distance was small enough, interbreeding with terrestrial humans would become theoretically feasible. The possible motives for creating hybrid offspring remain an open question. One line of speculation suggests that a future environmental crisis or intense solar activity might render unmodified human genetics non-viable, prompting intervention aimed at ensuring species survival. Another possibility is that the genetic work primarily serves the biological or strategic needs of the visitors themselves. If grey aliens are the product of advanced evolution or intentional engineering, their physical form may offer clues about the directions intelligent species can take over long spans of time. Large cranial volume implies expanded cognitive capacity and potentially forms of communication that do not rely on spoken language. Reduced musculature and the apparent absence of conventional reproductive systems would be consistent with a species that depends on technology and genetic design rather than physical strength or biological reproduction. At the same time, hands with fingers and thumbs, sensory organs, and a means of exchanging information would still be required for any civilization capable of building and maintaining complex technology. A greatly enlarged brain would constitute their most significant asset, supporting cognitive abilities that may substantially exceed those of contemporary humans and possibly enabling telepathic or other nonverbal forms of communication beyond the reach of most people. George Norrie has observed that the notion of humanity being fashioned in the image of advanced beings closely echoes language found in the Book of Genesis. It is at least conceivable that entities resembling modern humans arrived on Earth, performed genetic alterations on existing hominid populations, and later departed, leaving behind the lineage that became present-day humanity. Ken Storch frames the same idea more directly. The long-discussed missing link in human evolution may be extraterrestrial genetic intervention that occurred eons ago and set our species on its current developmental path, including the eventual capacity to leave the planet and travel into space. In this view, human evolutionary progress is in significant measure the result of that earlier manipulation. A further possibility has been raised by researchers who examine both ancient traditions and modern encounter reports. Rather than crossing interstellar distances measured in hundreds or thousands of light years, the Greys might be time travelers originating from humanity's own distant future. In this interpretation, they have evolved into a hairless, large-eyed form and returned to their past, or present, for purposes that remain unknown. Some investigators go a step further and propose that the Greys may be interdimensional beings whose technology allows them to fold space and time. Philip Coppens has noted that once the possibility of interdimensional travel is taken seriously, conventional distinctions between ancient history, the present moment, and the far future begin to lose their sharp boundaries. That framework would also help account for the frequent time anomalies reported in close encounter cases. Under such a reading, the Greys need not come from another star system at all. They could originate from a remote epoch of Earth's own timeline.